Hello everybody, today we are going to work on factoring out a GCF. So what we need to do now, or what we need to do to start, is review the distributive property. So with the distributive property is if we had a number on the outside of the parenthesis, it goes to everything inside the parenthesis and we multiply. Okay, so let's go through and do this quick. So when we do 3x times 5x squared, we do 3 times 5 is 15. Then x times x squared is x to the third. Next one, we would have 3 times 2 is plus 6. X times x is x squared. And last but not least, 3 times 1, negative 1, is negative 3. And there's only one x right there, so it'd be 3x. So our final answer there would be 15x to the third plus 6x squared minus 3x. Okay, that should be a review. I'm going to make this a little less sloppy. And today what we're actually going to do is we are, instead of distributing, we're going to go from the purple one from here, and we're going to go backwards. We're going to make it look like this. In order to do that, we're going to do something called factoring out the GCF. Okay, so in order to do that, the GCF, first of all, a GCF stands for the greatest common factor. So that's just the highest number or letter that goes into or multiplies into everything. Now, knowing multiplication is your friend here. So, for example, it says rule for numbers. Your general rule for finding a GCF in numbers is look for the highest number that divides into both. So, if you have a 15 and 20, you got to think, okay, what's a number that multiplies in to both 15 and 20? Well, 15 is 5 times 3. 20 is 5 times 4. Therefore, our GCF is 5 because 5 is the highest number that multiplies into both 15 and 20. So our GCF is 5 because it's the highest number that multiplies into both of them. Okay, let's do another one off to the side here. So let's think of 12 and 18. 12 and 18. In your head right now, you should be thinking, okay, what are numbers that multiply into both 12 and 18? Well, 12 is 6 times 2. 18 is 6 times 3. Those are the highest numbers, so your GCF between 12 and 18 is 6. Now, a common mistake here is to say, well, 12 is, let me get rid of all this. Whoop, okay. A common mistake here would be to say, well, 12 is 4 times 3, and 18 is 6 times 3. So my GCF, since 3 goes into both, my GCF would be 3. Now, 3 is a factor of 12 and 18. That means it multiplies into both 12 and 18, but it's not the greatest common factor because the highest number that multiplies into both would be 6. So although 3 is a factor, it's not the greatest common factor because there's a higher one that multiplies in. Okay, I'll do one more example here for numbers. Let's say we have 60 and 90. Yeah, let's not do 90, I lied. 60 and 50. Just think, okay, well, I know that 60 and 50, those are both divisible by 10. 10 multiplies into both. 6 times 10 is 60. 5 times 10 is 50, so my GCF is 10. Okay. Next is a rule for the variables. Variables are just a little bit different. The lowest exponent is your GCF. So if you have x to the fifth and x to the third, what's your lowest exponent? Well, the exponent on this one is 5. The exponent on this one is 3. So your lowest exponent is 3. So your GCF is therefore x to the third. Okay, let's go through and try a few example problems. It says factor out the GCF. So the first thing we need to do when we're factoring out the GCF is determine between letters and numbers. So I have a 6 and a 12. I have x to the third. and x. So you got to ask yourself, what number multiplies into both 6 and 12? What's the highest one? You should say, well, that's 6. That's easy. Next, you should say, well, let's look at my letters now. What's the least amount of x's I have? This one has a 3. Well, this one doesn't have one at all. So we just write down 6x. Okay, 6x is my GCF between these two terms. And now we're just going to take this one step further. Now what we're going to do is we're going to put a set of parentheses, just like before. Okay, I'm going to scroll up to the top. Just like before, when we started the lesson, I said, now we're going to start with this, and we're going to work backwards and make it look like this. So we found what the GCF was. In our case, it was 6x. It was 6x. But now what we're going to do is we're going to say, hey, well, how the heck do I figure out what goes in this parenthesis here? And we're essentially going to work our way backwards now. What we need to do is divide this first term by this. So what's 6x to the third divided by 6x? Well, let's start by 6 divided by 6 is 1. Okay, before I had 3 x's, I took out 1, so I'm left with 1x squared. Now, this 1 right here, you technically don't need to write. I'm going to put it in green. I would actually prefer if you don't write it, but if you do, it's not the end of the world. Now, we're going to divide 12x. I'm going to put that in red, actually. We're going to divide 12x by 6x, and we're going to put it right there. So what's 12 divided by 6? We should say, well, it's 2. Okay, now what's x divided by x? Well, if you have an x and you take it out, there's no x's left. So it's just 1x plus 2. Final answer. Okay, next up we have number 2. Again, we are going to look at the problem, and we're going to look at the numbers, and then we're going to look at the letters. So let's do the numbers first. A 5 and a 5. What number can you divide 5 and 5 by? Well, duh, you can divide them both by 5. And then for m squareds, what's the lowest variable that we have? You should say, well, we have 5 here. We have 5 m's here. We have 2 m's here. The least amount of 5's that I have is 2. 5m squared. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to divide both of my terms. I'm going to divide this one and this one by 5m squared, by my GCF. I'm going to divide yellow and green by black. So yellow plus green. I'm dividing both of those by the thing I'm going to put the black highlighter in there. I'm going to divide my yellow and my green by 5m squared. Okay, first up, we're going to do 5 divided by 5. We're going to do this divided by this. Well, again, that's just 1. Now, we're going to do, I'll erase that for you. I'm getting a little sloppy. Now, we're going to do m to the 5th divided by m squared. We're going to put it right there. Well, m to the 5th divided by m squared. Remember, when we are dividing exponents, we actually subtract them. So m to the 5th divided by m squared is simply m to the 3rd power. So it's m to the 3rd. Now we're going to move on to the next term. Now again, we have 5 divided by 5. That's just 1. Now we're going to do m squared divided by m squared. Well, that's also 1. So do I write 1 plus 1 there? Well, no, it's technically 1 times 1. But that 1 times 1 is just 1. So we just leave a 1 right there. Your final answer would be 5m squared times 1m to the 3rd plus 1m. Okay, that one was actually somewhat tricky. These bigger ones are actually a little easier, and I'll show you why. Okay, again, we're going to look at our numbers first, followed by our letters. So look at 25 40, and 50. What's the highest number that goes into 20, 40, and 50? You say, oh, well, that's easy. That's 10. I know 10 goes into all three of those numbers, so I'm going to factor out 10. Now, I'm going to say, okay, let's look at my letters. And again, we looked at the least amount of letters that we have. So look at the lowest exponent. The lowest exponent we have is x squared. Okay, so 10x squared is my GCF. Now what we need to do is divide each term by my GCF. So again, this right there, that's my GCF. I'm going to divide my yellow term by my GCF and put it here. So what is negative 20 divided by 10? Well, we get negative 2. Next up, what is x to the third? I'm dividing this term by my GCF. What's x to the third divided by x squared? Remember, we subtract the exponents, so we're left with just x. Okay, that's how we got the yellow term. Now, let's move on to my next term. My next term, I'm going to highlight under in, let's go green highlighter, is right here. I'm going to divide it by my GCF, which is 10x squared, and put it in the green space. So what is 40 divided by 10? Should say, well, that's positive 4. Now, what's x squared divided by x squared? Well, I took out both of my x squareds. Excuse me. So if you do x, I'll explain this a different way. If we do x squared divided by x squared, again, we subtract the exponents. So 2 minus 2 is 0. There's none left. We took this x squared, we took it, and it's out here. So it's gone now. Okay, next up, we have my last term, which is the blue one. So I'm going to put the blue one right here. What is negative 50, my first term, negative 50 divided by my GCF. My GCF is 10. So negative 50 divided by 10 is negative 5. Now we're going to do the same thing, but with my variables, with the variables. So what's x to the fifth divided by x squared? Again, you just subtract the exponent, so 5 minus 2 is x to the third. Close off your parenthesis, and that is your final answer. Okay, last one. Now this one looks big and scary, but it's the exact same thing, but just with two variables. So we're just going to do a little bit more work. It's not really that bad. So again, let's start finding our GCF. Let's start with numbers. Number that multiplies in to 15, 24, and 6. I would just start with your lowest one. 6 goes into 24 because it's 6, 12, 18, 24, 30, so on and so forth. So 6 multiplies in to 24, but it does not multiply in to 15. So my GCF can't be 6 because it goes into 24, but it does not go into 15. So now I need to look at another number. What other number multiplies into 6? Well, 3 times 2 is 6. Does 3 go into 24? 24 divided by 8 is 3. Yes. Does 15 go into 5? Yes, it does. 3 times 5 is 15. So that means that 3 multiplies in to all of these numbers. So my GCF is going to be 3 for my numbers. Okay, now let's move on to x's. I have x squared, I have x squared. So what's the lowest amount of x's that you have? Well, this one doesn't have an exponent, so I just take out a 3x. Now let's move along to my y's. I have y to the third, I have y squared, and I have y to the fourth. So what's the lowest amount of y's that you have? It should be y squared. 3xy squared is your GCF. Now, what I'm going to do again is I'm going to divide each term by my GCF. Again, I'll put it in purple. This is your GCF. So I'm going to divide my first term by the GCF. Numbers by numbers, letters by letters. So I'm going to do 15 divided by 3, and I'll put it right there. What is 15 divided by 3? You should say, well, Mr. Arthur, that's easy. That is 5. Okay, very good. Again, I'm going to do this whole term by my GCF. So I'm going to do the green underlined term. I'm going to divide it by the purple underlined term. But now I'm on to my x's. I have 2x squareds. I take out 1. So what's 2 minus 1? You're left with just an x, 5x. Okay, next up, we're going to do y to the third, and we're going to divide it by y squared, and we're going to put it right here. Okay, y to the third, you have 3 y's, you take out 2. How many do you have left? There is just 1 y left. Okay, I'm done with the green term. I'm going to move on to, let's do the blue term. So I have a negative 24. I'm going to divide it by 3. You can use a calculator if you want. What's negative 24 divided by 3? I'm going to put it right there. Negative 24 divided by 3. You should get negative 8. Okay, we're going to move right along. We'll move on to the x's. Okay, I have 1x. I'm going to take away 1x. How many x's are left? None, so I'm not going to write anything. Let's move on to the y squareds. Okay, I had 2 y's. And I took out both of them. I had y squared. I took out y squared. So what's left? No y's. I'm not going to write any. So the blue one, all you need to write is that minus 8 right there. Okay, last but not least, we're going to move on to the red term. So again, I'm going to do 6 divided by 3. 6 divided by 3, I'm going to write it right there. 6 divided by 3, you should be saying, well, that's easy. 6 divided by 3, that's 2, but I got to put a plus sign there because it's a positive 2. It was a positive 6 divided by a positive 3, which is positive 2. Okay, next up, I had x squared. I had 2 x's. I took out an x. How many x's are left? 1. Okay, last but not least, I had 4 y's. I took out 2 of them. How many are left? Should say, well, Mr. Arthur, that's easy. There are 2 y's left. So this would be your final answer. 3xy squared times 5xy minus 8 plus 2xy squared. I have one more thing for you. It's not a problem, but I want you to be aware that this stuff gets easier the more you practice and try. I promise you, it's one of those things. It's like riding a bike. Once you get it, it's just going to click. But the first time you tried biking without training wheels, probably fell over a few times. So keep trying. Show some perseverance.